add an element to the list. Now, since we have added an element to the list, let's try to remove that element from the list as well, because we've added one. Let's try removing it. To remove it, a fairly simple idea, you just have to use reads dot remove of whatever is that exact value. That is matcha green tea. And I'm just going to specify it as remove the value or remove the item from the list. Now, here's the problem with removing item from the list. It will work. However, if you try to remove an item that doesn't exist, I'm just using lowercase t compared to uppercase t. If you enter an element that doesn't exist, you will get a value error. Now, you remember all the errors, or what we call as all the um, specific exceptions, what we specifically call in future, but we'll just call them as errors for now. All the errors that might occur within your code will be always written in this casing system where first character of each word will be capitalized. And these error names will be helpful for us to figure out and resolve them in the future. But for now, let's just remember this. Remove is a function that will remove an element from the list if that element exists. However, if that element does not exist, remove will raise an error called value error. And that error will stop your program from running, and it will not execute the rest of the lines in your program. Just something you should know. In our case, when we run this, it's going to stop rest of the code from running regardless. Right. So let's try this out. Let's take a look at what this is and how this works. I'm just going to specify here that if exists, otherwise raise an error. So I'm just going to specify this in detail later on about what exactly raising an error is within this, right? Anyway, let's move on to another way of inserting an element. Another way of inserting an element is, let's remove exactly this element for now, right? So another way of inserting an element is you can use reads dot insert as a function. Insert will take two values, the index before which you want to insert and the value you want to insert. To understand this better, let's consider a list like this. This is an index 0, 1, 2, and 3. I want to insert 4 before index 3 so that 5 will become index 4 and 4 will become index 3. So I want to insert 4 before index 3's element. To do that, I just have to use insert function followed by which before which index am I supposed to insert and what is the value I'm supposed to insert there. That's it. That'll insert that particular value before that particular index. For example, if I want to insert something in the first as the first element of the treats, let's say, for example, I want to insert stolen Snickers as the first element of the entire list, then I just have to specify I need to insert it within index 0. Once we do that, this particular element will go to index 0. So let's run this. So you can see stolen Snickers comes up as the first element within this entire list. Similarly, if you want to remove, now we have seen insertion and removal at the based on the value. You can insert based on an index. So this is again insert of index comma value. If you want to remove an element from its value, you can use treats dot. Let's see where that. Yeah, there we go. Pop. Pop is a function where you can specify an index where you can remove an element from. And I want to remove stolen Snickers again from the treat because stolen Snickers should not be a treat, right? So in this case, when you perform pop, you can specify an index, and whatever index you specify, the element in that index will be removed. If you run this now, stolen Snickers is no longer there in the list of treats. It's just removed entirely. So we only have these as we expect. So yeah, this is what we have for now. Moving ahead, let's move on to the next part of this. So the next part of this is, okay, let's go ahead. Where were we? Yeah. The next part of this is, what if you insert, or again, in pop, specifying index is optional. So here, index is optional. That is, if index is not entered, it removes last element only. So that's one thing we need to know. If you don't specify any index, it's going to by default remove only the last element, just for our understanding. So again, that's a function that we have, that a function that exists, and that's basically how it works. So there are two ways for you to insert elements. One, either as the last element or specifically specifying an index, and removing as well, either based on the value or based on the index. Now that we know these, there are a couple of other functions that we often have. That is, you can print len of treats. This is going to give you the entire length. Len is an inbuilt function, and this can be applied to any iterable. You can apply this to a string. It's going to give you the length of all the characters in the string. In that case, you can apply this to a list. It's going to give you the length of the or number of elements that are there in the list, and so on. This is one thing that we have. Apart from this, you have one more thing called del. Del is an inbuilt command again to delete anything. If you want to delete the entire list, just write del followed by treats. That's it. It's going to delete the entire list. And this is one other function that you have just for reference. Now, if you take a look at this, len of treats is 6 because there are exactly 6 treats specifically within this, just for our reference. All right. So these are some basic functions that you just need to know. But apart from this, there are a lot of other functions like, let's say, treats dot. Um, oh yeah, let's take a look at this. This is one thing I haven't specified about. It's quite important as well. So yeah, let's observe this once. We have the following functions that are going to be quite important for us to look into. And here's how they work. In our case, let's consider this. Let's say this is tweets, and let's create a new list called new treats. Let's say new treats are going to be something we'll add along with it. Let's take a let's take 2 or 3 examples to begin with. Let's just add something like dark chocolate and yeah, I'm running out of thought process about treats. Maybe I just haven't had much as of late. So I'm just gonna add some random stuff that come up off the top of my mind. Let's say dark chocolate, Kit Kat, and let's say cola or something like that. Let's just add something like this. That should be fine enough. Now, here's what I'm gonna do. Treats dot append of new treats. I want to add this new treats over to my current list of treats that I have. That's exactly what we need to do. But here's the problem. Whenever you perform this, and if you print treats, let's try to print this. You can see here, there's a problem. That is, whatever list we have added, it is added as an element within our list. It's not added as an additional list. So the big problem here is the element that we have added is added particularly as an element alone. We have three elements in the list. All three are added as a single element. But I don't want that to happen. I want each element of the list that is new treats to be added as a single element of list one at a time. That is what I want it to perform. In that case, whenever you're performing combination of multiple lists, in our case, we're going to combine treats with new treats and make a larger list. And each element in the list should only be a string. It just should combine both the lists. So to do that, instead of making append, you can use extend, and this will combine two lists together. So when you run this, you get to see the list with all the elements as individual strings. So this is just one example that we need to know in terms of basic functionality and basic application of operations, let's say within the list that would be some sort of basic things that we'll work on. Now, uh, now that we know this, let's finally move on to some advanced functionalities that we do on top of lists. So let's just remember a few things that we are yet to work on. That is range and all of these. Right. Let's start with these. Now, when we start to work on some advanced concepts within list, the first thing I want to do here is sort lists. So let's think about this. I would like to sort lists based on the number of vowels each treat has. So I just want to sort the treats based on the number of vowels it has. So the idea that I want to have is pretty simple. The more vowels a treat has, the better it is. The lesser vowels a treat has, the worse it is. Or some random logic, right? It doesn't have to be practical for us to understand this logic. I just want to sort them in short. And here's the thing. You can only perform sorting on lists under two conditions. One, all of them must be of the same data type. Sorry. If they're not of the same data type, you cannot sort them. For example, let's take li equals 1, 2, 3, and a. I'm just going to perform li dot sort and I'm going to print li. If you run this, you get to see you cannot perform sorting between numbers and characters because you cannot do lesser than comparison between numbers and strings because sort will compare them. You cannot do that. Instead, it has to be only numbers or only strings. Let's take 123.5.6. You'll be able to sort it. You'll get the exact same value. You can use int and float together. You can use only strings separately, but you cannot combine them when you perform sorting. This will perform default ascending order. Whenever it is numerical values, it's going to perform sorting based on ascending order by default. Similarly, if you want to perform sorting by descending order, you just have to write li.sort of reverse equals string. So there's a key called reverse within sort function, which is false by default. Since it's false by default, it's always going to go sort in ascending order. You just have to make it true so that it performs sorting in descending order. That's all you need to do. When you perform this and you print the list, you'll get the list sorted in descending order. That's a basic thing that we just need to know when it comes down to list and its simple sorting functionality. Now, this is about list with numbers, but what if I want to sort tweets which are alphabetical characters, right? Which are strings. How do I sort them? If you take tweets dot sort and if you print tweets, if you run this, you'll get to see they will be sorted based on alphabetical order by default. So the idea is default sort based on alphabetical order ascending. Again, the same thing. Okay, I'm sorry, I should have written this up here. Right. Same way, if you want to sort it in descending order, you can use streets dot sort, where you can specify reverse is true, and this is going to sort it in descending order of alphabetical order. But that's not what I want to do. I want to perform sorting based on my own logic. I want to perform sorting based on a specific logic that I have, that is based on the number of vowels they have. That is what I need to do. So that's going to be our next approach. That is what we're going to do up next. But prior to that, if there are any queries or questions still here on what we are going through and what we are working on, please feel free to ask any question. I'll just give you all a few seconds. If there are no queries, we will move ahead. Right. So I think we're good to go ahead. Awesome. Right. So thanks for the response on that. Um, right. So let's move ahead. Perfect. Now, for us to perform sorting based on number of vowels, we need to add a function. To add a function, we need to first learn about functions within Python. So there are a few things when we start on day one and we start learning a few things. There will be a few dependencies rather where if you're going to learn something, you need some other concept. If you need to learn that, you need some other concept, and we might get sidetracked sometimes. That generally tends to happen when you're learning from scratch, but there is a dependency for us to learn functions, particularly within this. For this purpose, in order to start and learn how to sort based on number of vowels, we already have that here. Let's take that up. Let's put that up here. To sort based on number of vowels, we need to first learn functions. So I'm just going to create a new file here, and I'll just call it as functions.py. Now, just like we know a for loop, which has a colon to indicate its beginning, and all the statements in for loop are written after a set of spaces, so that these statements are only executed under this loop or under a condition or so on. Similar to that, there's also the concept of a function which begins with DEF. DEF stands for define a function. So you can define a function with DEF, and DEF followed by a function name. Let's call it as fun. And within this function, you can write any number of lines of code that you want. And all these lines of code will only be executed when you explicitly call this function by writing fun. Until you call this function, this is not going to be executed. That's basically the whole idea. So if you write about 5 functions within a Python code and run it, none of them will be executed unless you call them. That's the whole idea. So let's just take a look at this and begin with this very quickly. I'm just going to write a few functions to begin with so that we understand different kind of functions when we talk about Python particularly. So let's start with this. Let's take up a function to add two numbers. Let's say we'll calculate sum. We'll create a function called calculate sum, or we'll just call it as print sum. Let's create few different functions. This is to print sum of two numbers. Currently it's empty, so I'm just going to write pass. We're going to fill it later on. Let's create another function to return sum of two numbers. And let's create another function to just print hello world. That's it. Um, for the hello world function, it's pretty simple. In this function, all I need to do is just print hello world. So I can just call this function. Let me just run this program to begin with. Once you run this, you see nothing's happening. It's just an empty output. There's no output at all that we see on the screen. That's because nothing's happening over here. Though these functions exist, none of them are executed. To execute it, you need to write the function name with brackets specifically so that you are making a call to this function and then it's executed. So when you run this, it executes and prints hello world. One basic thing that you need to know is please never call the function before writing the function. Please never do this where you're calling the function first um, and then you're writing the function. Your program will not work. It says this function is not defined anywhere. That's simply because Python, like any other programming language, will go through your entire code from top to bottom to understand it. Since it's going to go through your code from top to bottom to understand it, you need to define and give details about what your function is first, and then make a call to it. If you make a call to the function first and then define it, your programming language, when it goes through your code top to bottom, it sees that you're making a call to function but you haven't defined it, and it just says, hey, you got an error, and um, it's just going to give you this particular error. That's basically what happens here. Now with this idea, let's move on to the next part. Now we have printed hello world. Let's call print sum up next. In print sum, I want to print the sum of two elements. So I have to pass two elements to find sum, right? So I'm going to pass two elements like 5 and 6. Once 5 and 6 are passed, I need to retrieve them here. After retrieving them, I need to print the sum of them. So I'm going to retrieve like A and B. What I'm doing here is, whatever is the first value sent in this function, it's going to be read here as A. Whatever is the second value sent here, it's going to be read here as B. So when you hover over this function, you can see A and B. Just like any other function that is available in sort, when you hover over it, it says you can provide any element, then a key, then a reverse. You can provide three parameters. Same way here, when you hover over it, it'll say you can provide two variables, A and B. A can be any, B can be any. Now, with this, let's work around this and let's add some values to it. So the basic way to do this is pretty simple. We're going to write here print A plus B. Done. So once we do this and we run this, it should print A plus B, which is 11. But you see there's one problem here compared to the function they have and we have. You can see here, they have reverse should be a Boolean. They're specifically writing here, a reverse must be a Boolean. But when we hover over our function, it just says A can be anything, B can be anything. But if we are giving this function to someone, we need them to know that A must be an integer, right? and b must be an integer. So to do that, there's a way to do it. After a, just write colon int, and after b, just write colon int. This will make sure that wherever you're calling the function, it'll get specific information that a must be an int and b must be an int. So this is how good documentation is done for functions. If you look at this function here, you see index must be an index and an object, whatever you're adding could be a string, for example. And this is how we get to know, this is how we get to figure it out. And when you check this, you see a must be an integer, b must be an integer, and that's how this function works. Now, I need to create another function that's going to perform the exact same thing, where it's going to take two variables and add them, but with one minor change, with one minor difference. The difference I want to make is this. After taking these two variables, instead of just printing them, I want to send the result back. Now, remember how we had done it for strings earlier. If you perform s1 dot, let's say, a strip function, it'll perform strip and it'll return a copy of s1, right? Because s1 is immutable. It will return a value. That's exactly what we need to do as well. We need to have it return a particular value at our scenario as well. That's what we want to do at our end. So let's see how can we particularly perform this. To do this, I'm just going to write here in return sum. I'm going to take two values and I'm going to calculate its sum. Let's call it as sum equals a plus b. And I'm just going to write return sum, indicating that we are returning the variable sum back to the user. To avoid multiple lines, you can just write it in a single line. Let's say return a plus b. That's pretty much it. We can do this as well. So this is what we're going to do. Now, let's get started with this and let's see how this works. If I'm going to call a return sum of 5, 6, again, let's make sure that these are particularly integers. A is an integer and b is also an integer. Now, one little problem. Here it says return sum is gonna, oh, it has directly detected what will be the return value, which is int. So that is fine. That should not be an issue. However, if you want to explicitly specify what will be the return type, you can do that here by writing, as you can see here, the return type is arrow mark int, right? So you can copy the same thing and just place here. This will indicate that your return type will always be int. You will always specify here that your return type is int. And I'm going to specify why this is kind of important. I don't think this will work around. Let's see. If a, uh, sorry, if let's say a, or I'll just give some condition. If a is equal to 5, for example, then I'll return a plus b. If you observe here, it can return int or none because there is condition. If this condition is true, it will return int. Otherwise, it will return nothing. So it gets to detect what will be the return type accordingly. This is one thing that we just need to know. But you can externally specify it like this as well, if you would like to. And that will override whatever would be default. But anyway, let's not move too deep into this. Let's just get to the basic idea of functions so we can learn it and get back to our logic. When you run this, you get to see it's going to return, but let's remember it's just returning. We're not printing it, right? So I'm just going to save this result somewhere. Let's say result, and then I'm going to print result here, which is going to give us 11. So this is the way we can perform or we can create functions. And this is a simple function with no arguments, no return values. This is a function with arguments, but no return values. This is a function with arguments and a return value as well. Now, one amazing thing about Python is most other programming languages allow you to return only one value. Python allows you to return any amount of values you want. If I write here, return, let's say, two values, and I create a function which returns 10 comma 20, for example. And if I make a call here, like a comma b equals return two values, and I print a comma b, it's going to print 10 comma 20 here because we are able to return multiple values from a function in Python as a programming language. It's not possible in other programming languages like let's say C, C++, Java, and so on, or directly it's not possible. You have to do some additional logic in order to perform this. It's not directly available. So yeah, let's move on to the next part. With this understood, now that we know about these functions on basics, if there are any questions still here, please feel free to let me know. If there are no questions still here, we can move ahead to the next part of the logic. So I'll just give a few seconds for you to take a look into this. If there are any queries you might have, please feel free to let me know. All right, so no queries so far on this. That's awesome. So let's move ahead in that case. Right. Now that we know how these functions work, now that we know these basic scenario, let's go back to our particular problem. And prior to that, one more important thing. You remember there are certain functions that have default values. Reverse has a default value as false. That means if you don't send reverse, it's going to take default value as false always. This is something we can do in our functions as well. This is something we can create in any function we are able to make as well. I'll just give you one simple example. Let's create one more function that is return sum, but this time I'll write a equals 0 and b equals 0. What this essentially should mean is that if a is not entered as a value, then it should have a default value to this. In other words, if you don't send a at all, it'll have a, okay, I'm sorry, I made one mistake. Let me add this ahead here. Yeah, there we go. Same goes here. This means if you don't send a value for A, it's going to become 0 by default. If you don't send a value for B, it's going to become 0 by default. So if you print return sum of nothing, okay, let me not call return sum. I'll call this as return sum default, new function, right? Let's call return sum default, and I'm not going to send anything. You can see here, A has a default value of 0, B has a default value of 0. Just like how we saw here, reverse has a default value of false, very similar to that. So you can run this and you'll get 0 as the result because 0 plus 0 is 0. Now, this follows one condition. Default values must be written in right to left order, not left to right order. In other words, you cannot give a default value for A and skip for B. That cannot happen. But you can give a default value for B and skip for A. Default values should always go right to left in the order. So the reason for this is if I send first value 10, it should by default go to A, whereas the next value can be optional. I can either write comma 20 or I can leave it. That's why we use default values to be written in the order of right to left alone, just for our understanding. Anyway, with this done, let's move ahead. This is the very basic idea of functions. And I really don't think we can move ahead from functions all the way to sorting the trees based on number of vowels immediately because of the time constraint we have for today. So first thing I'm going to do is share all these programs over to you that we have done so that you can keep a track of them and you can check them out later today if you'd like. Um, Along with this, one query just to ask. Um, Yeah, okay. As Oresti pointed out, I think our planned timing is also 4:30, if I'm not wrong, that we have been specified as well. So that should be fine, I believe. So just one query that I wanted to ask, would you like me to share maybe a few um, questions that you, or few small programs that you want to try by yourself, um, followed by this, so you can try them out later today? If you'd like to, I can provide them. All right. Yes. All right. Right. In that case, I'll just provide that. And prior to that, I have just a couple of things that I would like to share before we go ahead for that. So first is, given it's day one, and this will be something I will be taking on a daily basis. So one thing is I would highly request you to fill this forms, Google Forms. This is purely anonymous. And it's your feedback to me about the sessions that we have so that I can understand how useful it is to you. And if you feel there are some ways that it can be better or some ways where I can approach it in a different way that can help you work through it in a better way, feel free to let me know. I will work around that. So it's a personal feedback towards me by me. So this is purely only towards me so that I can get to know whether I'm able to reach your expectations and whether you're able to feel like this is worthy of the time spent and so on and so on. So you can feel free to fill this, just 2 or 3 questions. It shouldn't take more than a minute. Followed by this. For now, I'm just going to share these files over in a new directory. Let me just create a new directory called Hanover-2. We already have a Hanover directory here. So yeah, and I'm just going to share this across all of you. I'm just going to share it here for reference. And all the programs that we have done till date, that is till today, given it is day one, you will be able to access it within this drive for reference. Yeah, that is the second thing. And now I'll just share a few queries for you to work upon, a few queries for you to try upon. I'll just copy that from where I have it. Please give me just a few seconds. Will not take more than maybe a minute. Right. So yeah, meanwhile, if there are any concerns that you would like to raise, or if you have anything that you would like to specify as well, please feel free to let me know. We'll take a look into it as well. So yeah, prior to that, yes, the links are in this chat. I've just shared the links in this chat.
The reason I'm
So
asking is
you,
'cause from my perspective, I can't see those links. I'm not sure if I'm the only one experiencing that.
all right. Let me
I
see
can
the
see them.
last chat. All right. I can share them once again just in case. Also, if any of you are unable to access it, I'm sure um, some of your colleagues will also be able to help you out with that if that would be feasible as well. So yeah, by the time I'll just add one more document in a short while. There is the questions that I can have you try them later on. So I'm just sharing this for reference. Again, I hope you should be able to access it now for reference though. So, yeah,
If anyone's
with
able
this,
to just private message me the links, for some reason it's just I can't see it.
right, I think some of your colleagues might be able to do that. I might not be able to do
Oh,
that
it just popped
here.
up now. It just
Yeah,
popped up now. I see it.
all right, then no worries. That should be cool. All right, so we'll wind up here for today. I will be adding a few questions and sharing them within that link shortly, maybe within the next 5 or 10 minutes. So you can take a look and access that. It will be in the Drive link. And yeah, as a